Great. Thank you, Linda. Great to be with you, and thanks everyone for being here on this Monday afternoon, or I suppose if you're on the West Coast, it might still be morning on Monday. But thanks for joining us, and I'm happy to have a chance to share with you. This is sort of an overview of Accordance, kind of a big picture look at the program. And some possible ways that you can use it. I recognize a number of the names from other webinars that I lead. There may be some overlap with some of the other webinars, both that I and other instructors lead, but the title of this webinar that you signed up for is Introduction to Accordance for Proficient Computer Users. And the idea is that I think sometimes when people come new to Accordance, there is both the potential learning curve with Accordance, a new program or a new app, but then there's also kind of the general question of computer proficiency and comfort level with just kind of general computer operations. And so those are two potential layers to kind of work through as you're learning something like Accordance. It's definitely a unique app, but there are also some functions and kind of general approaches to it that if you're familiar using any number of other apps on a computer that you know, you'll be able to pick up Accordance a little bit more quickly. So that's kind of the group that we have in mind today when we talk about proficient computer users, someone who would be comfortable just sitting down and kind of doing their thing on a computer start to finish for whatever task it is. But we're not going to assume a lot of knowledge necessarily about Accordance itself. So I want to give kind of an overview of some what I think are some pretty essential operations in Accordance, some things that you want to make sure to know how to do. I just recently sat down with a couple of brand new users and was kind of starting from the very beginning with Accordance, and so it was a good reminder for me, what are the kinds of things that you might want to know about just right out of the chute with Accordance. All right, so you don't have a handout for today, but I'm going to do a few things. First, we'll talk about setting up a workspace and some of the parts of it. We're going to spend a little bit of time on preferences because, again, when you're first getting Accordance set up, or maybe you've had Accordance set up for some time now and you didn't even think about going through the preferences, there are some important settings there that can help your use. So we'll do workspaces, preferences. We'll talk also about the library and some library groups and groupings. We'll talk about the toolbar, and I've got a list of other things as time permits that I'd love to show off about Accordance to you. And as Linda said, we will stop for questions. If you can, you know, hold questions till stopping points where I break, or if you've got something you want to make sure that you don't forget, you could just type it into the chat box, and Linda will help me keep track of those as we go, different stopping points to make sure we're answering folks' questions. So with that said, let's jump in. Let's talk first about setting up a workspace. Now in Accordance 12, I've got this basic workspace, which is kind of the default. It opens up with a Bible, my default Bible version, which right now is set to the NRSV. By default, it also opens up with the info pane. And we may talk about that a little bit later, but the short version of info pane is that it curates your library, ties it to the verse that you're looking at, and helps you to get at research more quickly. So you'll get, here are some topics that have to do with Genesis 1:1, your commentaries that have this verse listed, and you can see I'm hovering over them, the instant details down here. It's just kind of a quick information pane. It's pulling up as I scroll faster than we can read right now, but I just wanted to show how quick it is. It's pulling up little excerpts from those commentaries. And then a couple of other categories, study Bibles, cross-references, and more. That's what opens by default in a workspace in Accordance. Now you can change that setting so that this info pane doesn't open. For now, I'm just going to close it so that we're just looking at a Bible version. There are many different uses for Accordance. I think the program is built kind of around Bible texts. You can certainly open up a book in Accordance that's not the Bible and search it just fine without having a Bible open, but I want to start with the Bible as a basic search text because that's kind of how the program I think is designed in some ways. So we'll start here with Genesis 1:1, and just the first thing to note about Accordance is that you can get set up pretty quickly with a couple different versions, and probably the easiest way to do this, there's a number of ways, but the easiest way is through this Add Parallel pane. And you can see we're gonna get pretty detailed with a number of the icons and operations. But if you forget even all of what I say about that, know that in Accordance you've got these little tips, these user tips, that if you're not sure what something does, hover over it and just wait a second, and chances are some kind of pop-up message like this will come up, which is add a parallel pane to your search results. And so maybe you don't know what this icon is, switch panes to horizontal orientation. So know that you can do that in Accordance. You can hover over, not everything, but a lot of things you can hover over them and it will tell you what to do, or it'll tell you what that thing does that you're hovering over. So you can search a Bible text by words or by verses. Let's just do a verse search, and let's go into 1 Corinthians 2. And so here's 1 Corinthians 2, and let's say I'm studying this passage and I want to get set up. One of my first steps is going to be to add some parallel panes of some other Bible translations. So when you click on Add Parallel, you're going to get recent modules that you had open, so you could click any of those. It remembers the last 5 things you had, so there's one, the NASB. And then you can also just go to Texts, and it's going to give you a list. Now your texts will look different from mine. You'll have ones that I don't have, and I might have ones that you don't have, but from this list you can select, maybe say the ESV, and let's take, I don't know, let's take the New King James Version. So whatever versions you want, you can open them up in parallel so that you've got 4 parallel panes. This is kind of the first step that I use when I am reading through a biblical text, is that I get these parallel panes set up. And now they will scroll together with the first pane. So if I'm reading through the NRSV, you see this light blue, it might be hard to see, but this light blue line around here, it's almost like a box. I guess there's not a 4th side here, but it tells me I'm in the NRSV. So these other versions now follow me. If I were in the ESV, see how the blue box moved over there? Same thing. So as I scroll forward, these other ones go along with it. And so you can just advance and compare, and everything stays with you, which I think is really nice. You can also do this with commentaries. So let's say you've done some initial reading through the text and now you want to get into some commentaries. Same thing as you did before, go to Add Parallel. You could go to the info pane. We'll perhaps talk about that later, but I want to show you another way to do it. Go to Reference Tools now, and you'll see that this follows the categories in your library: commentaries, visual, cross-references. And now it says, here are your commentaries. Which one would you like to open, basically? And so I'm going to take, let's take this one, the New International Commentary on the New Testament. Now, I selected that to open it, and it opened it right to 1 Corinthians 3:5, which is really handy because now I've got the comment on that passage here in my pane scrolling in parallel. So as you might guess, now if I advance any of these Bible texts, you can watch that the commentary is doing the same thing over here, 1 Corinthians 2:8. And what's convenient about this is you're not flipping pages like you would with hard copies. Not that that is that difficult per se, but this is much quicker. And it's even a quicker way to use Accordance than manually opening a commentary, searching your way to it. You've got it open here, and then let's say 3 weeks later you like the same workspace, and now you're preaching in Galatians or something like that. Just type in Galatians 6:1. And it's going to take all of your Bible commentaries and it's going to advance it to that passage. Now, it won't do that for that commentary because this was a book-specific commentary. But if I had something like this one-volume commentary that covers all of Scripture, see it's at Galatians 6:1. Now, if I go back to 1 Corinthians 2, it's got something there. If I go to John 3, it's got something there. So once you get whatever parallels set up that you want, whenever you run a search by scripture reference, they'll all follow you. So that's how you can get Bible text and commentaries. Of course, you can open as many as will fit on your screen. You can open up, let's take another New Testament commentary. Maybe I'll take the Word Biblical Commentary. Now, as these start to get small with this gear icon here, and again, if you wonder what that is, just that little tooltip says perform tasks on this pane. You can move these panes down if you want. So maybe you want to put a couple ones down there. So now you've got commentaries and Bible text. You can decide how you want to customize this workspace and how many tools, the commentaries and Bible text you want to have open. But the point is that this way you've got everything scrolling with you, and so any verse of the Bible that you look up that's covered in these commentaries is going to follow with you. Now, if you move to Genesis 12, you're not going to get anything in these because they're New Testament commentaries, so you'll need to open up a new commentary that has the Old Testament. Another way you can open up a commentary is not just through a parallel pane, but through a new zone. I'll show you how to do that. Here's your library. This is in the toolbar up here. We'll talk about the toolbar in just a little bit. And I had this Word Biblical open before. I want to get the Word Biblical Commentary Old Testament. So let's open that up. I just double-clicked in that from my library, and now it opens it up in a new zone. And the difference between a pane and a zone, the primary difference, is that these panes generally are tied together. You can actually untie them, but I don't want to get too detailed on that right now. Unless you change it, these panes follow each other verse by verse. Whereas if you open something in a new zone, you see this hard dark line here, that makes it a new zone. These versions are scrolling, and this one is not. Now, a reason why you might want to do that with the commentary, let's go back to let's do this. Let's go back to 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians 2, which is where we were just a moment ago. We'll get that Word Biblical Commentary open and open in parallel. Let me show you how. See, and then it'll tell you. So that says your pane cannot add it since the window is too small. So what I would do in that case, I would just close this library, free up some space, and there we go. No, still. Anyway, it'll let you know what you can and can't do. Maybe if you've got a bigger screen, you're going to be fine. So there is a difference then, here we go, in having it open in parallel and in a zone. So I'm in 1 Corinthians chapter 2. Actually, let's do a different one. Let's go back to John 3. Okay, here's John 3, and I'm scrolling here, and I get to John 3:2, and it's got it here in the Word Biblical Commentary. But let's say I want to back out and see what does this commentary say about John in general, or what does it say about Nicodemus in general. Well, for that exploration, I would want to get this same commentary right here open in a new zone, which I've done right here. And so I can just navigate down to John if I want to from the table of contents here on the side, or I can just type in a reference, John 3:1. Let's make this a little bit more manageable. All right, I'll change the size on these, and this is all just trial and error. But now here in John, so I've got John 3:1 or John 3:2, whatever verse I'm looking at on the parallel pane right here, but now I can search and read this commentary. I can get to John 3:1, of course, but I can also go back to the larger sections that include it, or perhaps more importantly, I can go right to the introduction. So it's a little harder to do that when you have the parallel panes because you've got there, it kind of pulls the verse-specific stuff. But if I want to look at the introduction in this same commentary, I can do it through a separate zone. So it's the same exact thing I've got open. Here I've got the verse-specific stuff. It'll just follow me right through. But this over here in this zone, I've got the same commentary open, not tied to anything because I want to be able to make my way through this introduction. Maybe there's something on Nicodemus in the introduction, or themes about how Jesus interacts with people or something like that, or Christology or soteriology. I suspect that's included. That's certainly a concern of John 3. So I have a separate zone there that I've got open. And then there's one other thing I'll show before I pause for the first round of questions, if there are any. You can open more commentaries and put them a bunch of tabs in here. So I'll do it like this. Let's get back to John 3:1. So I've just got a Bible text here. And again, this is all what's your personal preference. So here's the New Testament background commentary. I just double-clicked on it, and Accordance is smart. It knows that I already have a commentary open, and so it didn't put this in a new zone. It put it in the same zone right here, the same area, but it made it a new tab. It just kind of grouped my commentaries together, which is an easier way to make your way through the commentaries, because all of this now is commentaries. And so let's get maybe this ancient Christian commentary on Scripture open. And so now what I've got is just a Bible text here. I don't have any parallels at the moment, and I've got 3 different commentaries in different tabs, and I can actually tie these tabs to each other. And I can tie them over here to this text. So again, just personal preference if you want a parallel pane or to tie your tab. But if I go to this little drop-down arrow here and tab ties, and I pick the title here, NRSV with Strong's. Okay, here it is, NRSV with Strong's. And now you see this icon here, and what that means is that now this guy over here is going to scroll with this biblical text over here, kind of like how it was doing with the parallel panes, but the reason I might do it this way is I still have access to the table of contents. And then you can actually do the same thing here. You can tie it again. You can tie all of these all of these commentaries to the NRSV, so that now when I type in John 4, all 3 of these commentaries over here snap to John 4. Again, it has in some ways the same effect as opening those parallel panes, but it just gives you the whole tool to work with in a different zone if you wanted to kind of skip your way around and not be tied to each individual verse. So this is my kind of first step in getting going. A lot of the time if I'm studying a passage, I'm giving you the abbreviated version, of course. I'll spend some time when I've got text side by side. I'll open a Greek or a Hebrew text as well. But I will make use of parallel panes and oftentimes the zones, and then I will often, if I have multiple commentaries open at once, I might tie them together. Now the info pane is a shortcut way of doing some of this as well. We'll talk about that later as time permits. But I wanted to get a sense of kind of what do you do first when you open Accordance? What are some of the first kind of operations and setups that you might do getting a workspace up and running? Do folks have any questions thus far?
Yes, Chris.
Yes, Abram, I've heard it explained before, but I always can't yet keep it straight. Can you tell me what would be the advantage and when would you want to link it rather than tab tie? Because I get those two confused.
Oh, sure. That's a good question. Let me see if I can give a brief answer to that. The link is going to work more, you're going to want to use that more with your lexicons. And I'm not sure that you even, Linda, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not sure you would even be thinking in terms of a link with these different commentaries. That's more when you want the search that you're running in one of these, like a search on a word in a lexicon, when you want that same word to be searched in another lexicon, you would link them together then. Is that accurate, Linda, how you understand it?
Yes, ties is when you're tying to the Bible or tying book, chapter, and verse, and link would be 2 words. Okay. Right?
Yeah, that's right. So Chris, you would, if you were doing, depending on how our time goes, we could look at it later, but if you were doing a word lookup in a lexicon, you would basically you would probably want to do something like this where you get stuff, keyed together, but the terminology there is link and it's a different command that you run, but it kind of does the same general thing, which is to say it's looking up the same thing in multiple modules at once. It's just that as Linda says, the tab tie has to do with Bible verse references, whereas the link would be something, like a word search.
Okay, so see if I've got it right. So if you're going to be just doing scriptures, then you would tie different commentaries to it, or could you tie a dictionary to it?
I don't think you can, no, because the dictionary is going to be organized by alphabetical entry.
Okay.
Whereas, these will be organized by verse of the Bible.
All right, and you would link something when you've got several different dictionaries, encyclopedias, and things like that, and you're looking up, let's say, John the Baptist, a topic.
Yeah, that's right.
Link those together so that you wouldn't have to go in and open each individual one and go John the Baptist, John the Baptist.
Correct.
So link is more on a subject topic or something. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sure, that's a good way of saying it. Go ahead, Linda.
Kurt has a question. If I have a reference to a Bible, for example, the ESVS, but when I click on it, I get nothing, does that mean I didn't purchase that with my program? Kurt, you may want to ask this verbally as well, and Abram, unless you understand exactly what he's saying.
Oh, sure. Yeah, feel free to jump in, Kurt, but I think the answer is yes. If you're talking about it mentions a specific you know, it's got a hyperlink or something and you click on it and it doesn't work, it either means you don't own it or don't have it installed. But can you say a little bit more about what you're seeing?
Well, yeah, this is just my second one of these. I did the earlier one with Linda, and when I was trying to set up my default text, I just said ESVS because it gave me that as an option. But then it turns out I don't really think I had it, so I wasn't sure why it was an option for me in the drop-down menu if I didn't have it. So what I'm guessing is I just didn't purchase it, is what I'm guessing.
That makes sense. It shouldn't have been in your Amplify. I mean, it shouldn't have been in your no. It shouldn't have been there. Don't you think, Abram? It wouldn't have been there if he doesn't have it.
Right, I think that's right. Could you try, Kurt, if you go to your library and just type in ESVS, that would be the way to check. Maybe you've already done that, but if you don't see it in there, I mean, that's kind of the place to check.
Yeah, it's under my, it's there, but I can't. But when I go to do it, it punches up where I get a dialog box that says where is the file for ESV text.
Kurt, Kurt, you need to install it again, I think.
Okay.
I think something's yeah. I think you need to go to your Easy Install and install it again.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, good question so far. All right, well, let's talk about preferences. Actually, that Kurt gives us a nice transition, or at least I'll take it as a transition into preferences. Now, this is the preferences in accordance are a world of wonder. There are a lot of preferences here, and again, we said this is a webinar for proficient computer users, and we're not putting anyone on the spot or grading anyone on proficiency per se, but if you've used any more than 5 or 6 apps, you will know that this is a large number of preferences for an app to have. I can think of dozens of apps that I use where you open the preferences pane and you get maybe 3 tabs worth of stuff, and that's fine because that may be all that they need. Accordance, as you know, is a pretty advanced program, so there are a lot of preferences here. I just wanted to do a couple of these right now because I think that these first 3 especially are pretty important for your just kind of initial experience or day-to-day experience with Accordance. There is at least one webinar, I believe, that has to do specifically with preferences, so there is an opportunity to go more in depth with this stuff if you want to. But it is worth taking some time and also just kind of poking around and trying stuff out and see what it does. I mean, you're not gonna delete files off your computer or break your machine or break Accordance or anything like that. So it's definitely worth and I think kind of fun. I mean, this is I think how I learned it, just clicking through here and seeing what different stuff does. And if you don't know what it is, totally fine to leave it alone because the default preferences are usually set up for good use anyway. But let's talk about these first 3: general, amplify, and appearance. And I'll try to be brief with this because, like I say, it's a lot here to look at. But the startup, you can get Accordance, you can change what it starts up to. You can have it start up to a favorite workspace of yours, and when I select that, it actually shows me my list of saved workspaces. So let's say every time I open Accordance, I want it to open up to my Greek reading workspace. So look at Accordance now. Here it is. I'm going to quit Accordance. And well, it's going to do the Dropbox sync before it quits. And now I'm going to open up Accordance again, and it's going to open up to my Greek reading workspace. There it is. This is a workspace that I created and kind of took some time to get set up how I wanted it to. So whatever workspace that is, you can tell it to always open to your favorite workspace, even if you were working on something else before. You can also have it just open, and this is the one, I had my settings on this, this is the one I use the most, to open up to your last session. So that if I were to finish this webinar, or maybe you're trying stuff on your computer as you listen, if I were to finish this webinar with 3 or 4 workspaces that I really liked and wanted to get back to, I could close Accordance, and as long as startup was to last session, it opens it up to my last Accordance session with all 3 or 4 workspaces, whatever I had open. So you don't need to actually save anything for that to work. And then there's some other sessions here, but I think those are probably the 2, last session or favorite workspace. And there's some other settings here. I mostly wanted to talk about startup. You can, we talked about these, let's see here, where is it? Information tips, you can suppress those. That's the thing I was talking about where you hover over something and it gives you a tip. Even though I've been using Accordance for a while now, I still like having those there. So I uncheck that so that it does not suppress it, if that makes sense. There's some other settings here as well. And then this one is actually kind of a key one, open parallel tools and notes in vertical orientation. I don't know how long it was that I would, I showed you that first thing about opening a parallel pane, and again, this is all personal preference, but I like having them side by side to each other, and I went an embarrassingly long time with Accordance opening them by default stacked on top of each other and not liking that. And so every time I opened a new parallel, I would move it up, which you can do, and that's fine. But then I learned at some point that you can actually change that in the preferences. So again, that's under General, and it is Open Parallel Tools and Notes in Vertical Orientation. So keep that checked, and it will do it. If you uncheck it, of course, it will open them up, stacked how I just showed you. But totally personal preference. So that's general there, general preferences. These amplify preferences are also important because this is your triple click default. And a triple click is when you are in a text, and it gives you some different options, English, Greek, Hebrew, Latin, verse reference, they all have different triple clicks. If you triple click something, it's going to amplify or search in a dictionary. So I'll give you an example of that. This says my triple click in English is Anchor EL Bible Dictionary. I could change that to anything. Let's do Bible Themes Dictionary and see how that works. So I'm in Genesis 1:1, and I'm looking at the word created, and I want to look that up in a dictionary. There are a lot of ways to do that, but let's say I just want to get an initial look at my default dictionary. I'm sorry, I was showing you the wrong thing. Let's try that again. Okay, I'm sorry about that. I'm in a key number text here with the NRSV. So I've got my Hebrew key number text, and I've got Kohlenberger Mounts Hebrew. So when I want to look up the word created, I triple click it, and it takes me right to my default Hebrew lexicon. And you can change that in the preferences. Same thing with Greek. We'll take these in reverse order here. I've got Mounts Greek Dictionary. This is basically saying when you are in a key number text, so in other words, a Bible text that is keyed to the original languages, like this, you'll see it down here in the instant details. This preferences setting is saying where do you want to pull your information from when you look it up. So Greek key number, we've got Mounts Greek Dictionary. So let's get into a Greek text. We'll do Galatians 1 here. Paul an apostle, maybe I'm wondering about that word. I want to look it up. I'm going to triple click, and it's going to take me right here into this Mounts Greek Dictionary. So let's say now, and here's what I wanted to show you initially, let's say I'm in the Mounts Greek Dictionary, and this idea of messenger is fascinating to me, and I want to research that. Well, whenever you triple click on an English word that's not a keyed text, it's going to take you to your Bible Themes Dictionary. So from this Mounts Greek Dictionary, I can triple click on messenger, and it's going to take me to the word messenger, which happens to be in Bible Themes Dictionary, and then I can look that up. I can even drag this tab down here into a new zone so that I can look at this Greek word and this dictionary all at the same time. So that's basically triple clicking in Accordance, and there's of course a lot more to say about that, but the point I just want to make is that you can change these defaults so that when I triple clicked on Messenger, I could have had it go to any one of these. Of course, you can look up any of these whenever you want to, but it's just what's the one thing that opens from these texts. And then the last thing I want to show on preferences is appearance. And again, this is just something you're going to want to play with, I think. You can determine how wide the text is going to be. Let me see if I can show you this in action. So if I've just got a single biblical text, let's say, well, let me show you how it is at its widest. And this is kind of just like on the Kindle, you can change how wide it is. So here we go. personally, I find this a long way to get across the screen, and so I like, maybe cutting it off with some margins, and that's what this setting is, limit text width. So I think I had it at, I don't remember what I had it at before, but maybe 8. So now that's going to trim that down a little bit so it's easier to kind of skim through if you want to. So that's your text width. There's some other options here, table of contents, library font size. If you were looking at a library and if that text is not big for you, big enough for you, you can change this, say, to medium large, and now it makes that bigger. Lots of preferences to go through in accordance, and as I say, I think the best way to familiarize with yourself with this is just to go through and try different things. But I do want to just highlight that anything in accordance, there are very few things you cannot customize. There are some things that are hardwired into the program, but if you're looking at something and it's not working for you, or you don't quite like how it looks, or it's too small or too big or too wide or too narrow, or the font on one pane is good but then the library is too big or too small, chances are you can change that and get it to look how you want it to look in the preferences. And let me just say one other thing about preferences. We'll pause again for questions just in a couple minutes here. Related to preferences are this toolbar up here. And this is also worth, I think, taking some time to get to know. You can perform a number of operations from up here. For example, you can open up the info pane. This is new in Accordance 12 that you could do that from up there. You could also just do it from the add parallel, but now you've got a way up here to do it. You can open up analytics when you're doing a word search. You can sync Dropbox. You can check your easy install. So if you, for example, you just bought something on the website, it won't show up automatically in Accordance. You have to load your purchases through easy install, and it'll let you do that. This toolbar row up at the top is also what allows you to open and close the library, as I'm doing there. You can do the library from here as well if you want to, but I appreciate just the visual reminder, the kind of quick way to open and shut it here. You can get a new tab, so you can open up anything from the toolbar. Highlights, papers, stacks, user notes. If you want to adjust what's in here, just right-click somewhere in the toolbar and go to Customize. And if you thought you already saw a lot of options, here are more. You can even put your preferences up there, actually. I have not done that yet, but I'm going to now, so that you can get to your preferences from here. Again, most of these, if not all of them, are already accessible through these drop-down windows here or through other means, but personally, and your mileage may vary, but personally I like to have stuff where I can see it and quickly get to it. Now, you can do just the icons if you're feeling bold. Even though I've used all of these icons a lot, I still like to have the icon in text so that I don't have to remember that that's instant details. If you wanted to save some screen real estate, you could do small size. In fact, you could do text only. And so again, this is if you're maximizing your screen real estate. I find that a little busy, so I like icon and text, and there I can kind of see all those operations there and get at them easily. But back to the customizing part, anything in here is an option to go in your toolbar. And so what you would do if you see something you like, as I showed you, is you just select it and drag it and drop it into the toolbar up there. Or if you have messed this up beyond recognition, it's got the default set right here, and you can just drag it up there and start over. Let me see what questions there are, if any, on preferences. Just those first three, we kind of barely scratched the surface, but mostly I wanted to get at preferences that I think you would need right away when using Accordance, whether for the first time or just in daily use. Any questions about preferences or the toolbar?
Yes, Chris.
On the preferences, there, I think it was in the appearance one, there was a little check mark that says override something. Can you go over what that was? I forgot about what that does.
Sure. Let's see, right here, was it this one in the Amplify?
No, go up. It says between the two group. No, I mean, sorry, stay on Amplify.
Okay.
All right, between the top group and the bottom group, right there, that's it.
Oh yeah, override key number dictionaries. Let's try that out. I don't think I have actually ever used that setting. So I may need to draw, Linda, put you on the spot, if I may, on what it is that does.
Oh, that applies to English Bibles or
Okay.
Anything other than original language Bibles.
So how would it change it if I have it?
The King James would go to the older Strongs. The New American Standard would go to the New American Standard. That's really, I think, the only two that it affects.
Okay, that makes sense. So those are, in other words, dictionaries that are tied to specific versions because they came from that version. But if you want to pick yours, you need to check that. And you'll notice here that it's grayed out, Chris, when I am not overriding them. So as Linda says, those defaults. So I don't even have the option. But if I check that now, I can pick the one I want.
Okay. So in other words, if let's say you're clicking on a word, it's going to take you to the Strong's Greek dictionary. But you could choose another Greek dictionary by triple clicking it. It's going to go ahead and take it, override the King James one, and take you to whichever one you did. Okay.
Yeah, that's correct. Yep.
All right.
Okay, and Rodney has a question.
Sure.
How do I automatically open all zones vertically? Not panes, but have the zones open vertically.
I'm not sure I don't know of a way to do that, and I don't know why they wouldn't open vertically automatically. Oh, go ahead, Linda.
So Rodney, yours aren't opening vertically then? Your zones are opening below? Let's see. And Rodney, let me unmute there. Rodney?
I may have the wrong terminology, but like we're in a Bible window and we've got several parallels open. Then we went to open the commentary in another tab or zone or whatever. Yours opened up vertically. Mine was underneath.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I can go over that. All right. So the setting that you want for it to open vertically. I just lost it. I was just there.
Well, okay, so I did tell him that, and he said no, that's not what he wants.
Huh.
So Rodney, that didn't work for you? Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Did that not do it for you, Rodney?
Just a minute. There. It changes parallels within the same. I'm missing the terminology here.
Zone.
When I open up a workspace, I have one tab, so I have a zone. So it'll change, and I add parallels, then that box changes those parallels to open all vertically. But when I open another zone, it opens underneath.
Yeah, I mean, the best thing I can think of, so right now, this setting, open parallel tools and notes in vertical orientation, when it's unchecked, it's going to open them underneath. But now when I go back and check it, it will do them vertically. Let's just test that here. Add parallel.
But you're not adding a new zone.
Yeah, he wants to add
adding a parallel.
Okay. So you're adding.
When earlier you opened a commentary like that, right there, what you just did.
Yeah.
So mine opens underneath.
Huh.
So how do I change that?
That I'm not sure about, and I don't know what would be causing that, because I believe the default is for it to open there, unless the only other thing I can think of is if you're opening something that is not, so this is small on my screen, but this is tools up here. So if you're opening something that is not a tool, so if you opened up like Josephus English, well, but see, even that it does vertically. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Right.
Rodney, would you try opening
the
a new
Bible knowledge
workspace
commentary
and see if it would change if you opened up a new workspace?
Sure. I'll close them all out.
Because I can't think of why that would be happening either, Abram.
Well, it did do it vertically in a new workspace.
Okay.
Okay, great. Okay.
Yeah. I don't think there is a setting for that, so that's, I mean, this doesn't help answer the question, why was that happening for you, but I think I can confirm that is kind of unexpected behavior. If you do find something like that, so I assume this is the kind of thing you were looking at, or if you just wanted to group more generally, you can take a tab, select it, and drag it up to where you want it to go, and then, you know, so if something opened down here, you could just manually put it up there. You could also, by the way, this is kind of further afield of your question, but if you wanted to look at commentaries in a different way, you could do the reverse of that, which is take a tab, drag it down, make it its own new zone. But anyway, I'm glad a new workspace got that working properly for you. All right, any other questions about preferences or the toolbar? All right, let's talk about library organization, because again, as I'm thinking about this webinar and I'm thinking Introduction to Accordance for Proficient Computer Users, one of my first steps in Accordance when I first started using it, and I think when I'm kind of recalibrating for a new study, I want to think about this library and how I've got it organized. Now, we've talked about how to open and close this library pane, and you have a really nice default organization scheme already set up for you in Accordance. You don't have to do anything. It just, I think somewhere when you set up the app for the first time, you need to say, yes, I want it organized. But other than that, it puts all your dictionaries together, all your commentaries, all your lexicons, grammars, history, writing, so on and so forth. So it's already organized, and so from that, you know, let's say you were preaching and you wanted to fill out a point with some sermon illustrations. I might just go to practical or preaching and look through some resources that are relevant for sermon illustrations. But let's say I'm thinking about Dietrich Bonhoeffer and I want to research what he has to say on a passage of scripture or a theme. Now, there is not a default Bonhoeffer category. There couldn't be, because then in Accordance there would also have to be a default MacArthur and N.T. Wright and, you know, whoever else. I mean, it would just be endless. But you can create your own category in the library, and that's why I wanted to spend just a minute showing you how to create a new group. And again, with just about everything in Accordance, there are multiple ways to do it. I'm going to show you how I do it, and I think it's fairly efficient. So what I want to do right now, let's say I'm in Galatians 1, and I want to just see what did Bonhoeffer have to say about creation in Galatians 1. As it turns out, Bonhoeffer wrote a book called Creation and Fall, which is a compilation of, I think, lectures on Genesis 1 through 3. So there is something I can look at immediately, but I can also probably correctly assume those are such foundational biblical passages that he's going to talk about them in other books too. So in my library, I'm going to search Bonhoeffer, and it's going to, oh, and I already have a group for that, but let me delete it so I can show you how to do it from scratch. All right, pretend you didn't see that, because that's the end result. Search Bonhoeffer, and it gives me these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 modules that I have, different volumes of the Dietrich Bonhoeffer Works series, and so I want to create a group out of those. Now, the way that I do this, it's pretty quick, is I just select all of them, and I right-click, and I go to Add to User Group, and I get this option now of a new group, and so you'll see it gave me a space here under My Groups. This is in my library. I was just up here. Now it's got an untitled thing, and I'm going to call this Bonhoeffer, or Bonhoeffer Works, whatever you want to call it. So now I've got, and I'll show you why this is, how you can get to this in just a moment, but now I've set up my own user group. You could have done helpful books for sermon illustrations, or you know, theology I agree with, or theology I disagree with, or whatever, however you want to organize your library. But I wanted Bonhoeffer Works, and so I created that group. Now, I would like to, this is maybe a little bit finicky of me, but I'd like these to not be 2, 3, 8, 1, 4, 6, 5. As it turns out, you can go to Bonhoeffer Works title, the group title here. You can go to alphabetize and volume 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 8, and it put them all in order for me. So now I've got my own user group of Bonhoeffer Works in Accordance. And so I'm going to show you now how that might be useful. I'm in Genesis, actually I'm in Galatians. Let's get back to Genesis. I'm in Genesis 1:1, And I want to search now. I want to search Bonhoeffer by scripture reference, by Genesis 1:1. So there are a few ways I can do this. The first way is I select the scripture reference. Now I right-click and I go to Research. And now it's going to give me, these are all the default categories that I just showed you in the library, but right here, kind of separated by those two faint gray dividers, it's giving me Bonhoeffer works. It's allowing me now to do a search of all the Bonhoeffer works for Genesis 1:1. And when I click on that, I see, of course, as I expected, Creation and Fall, which is about Genesis 1 through 3, has some search results, but also his Ethics talks about Genesis 1:1, as do a few other volumes. Now, when you search Genesis 1:1, it's going to not just look up Genesis 1:1. It's going to look up any scripture range that includes Genesis 1:1. So, for example, this sentence here, in 1932 to 33, his lectures on Genesis 1 through 3 dealt with creation and sin and were published as Creation and Fall. Well, Genesis 1:1 is in this scripture range, so that's why it returned that search result. If you wanted to get specific and just say, no, I want only when Genesis 1:1 is mentioned as an individual verse in Bonhoeffer, type in an equal sign there, and that's going to narrow your search greatly to just the times when Genesis 1:1 is mentioned in any of those volumes. Now, it's worth saying this is not two hits that I'm seeing in this sidebar. This is two volumes that have hits, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 hits. So you have to kind of roll your move your cursor through here, and you can open them in a new zone if you want to, as it did down there, or you can click on More and read more in the pane. So you can kind of navigate your search results from this research pane, or you can open them in a new zone if you want to kind of keep this as your command center but do your reading in a separate zone. So what I've done is I've created a user group. I've searched it by verse reference. There's another way to do that, as you may have guessed. I could also select that verse reference, and in my library I could go down to Bonhoeffer works, and I could click on this Amplify button here. And if you didn't know what this icon was, again, those tooltips will tell you search Bonhoeffer works for the selection. And in fact, I do want to do just that. So that's the same thing as I just did with the right-click research, but I did it from the library. And one other way is from this Amplify tool, this icon up here. Same thing as what I've been doing already, but you can search you can get to research in Bonhoeffer works from the icon up in the toolbar. You could also search for a word in Bonhoeffer. So if I wanted to search the word created in the Bonhoeffer works, same thing. Right-click, research Bonhoeffer works. It's going to give me every time. It actually did a flex search, which is nice because maybe I want Bonhoeffer talking about the verb create, but I know that he's going to use its different tenses like creating or create or created. Well, this flex search, it's set up to it by default, so it's going to give me lots of text in Bonhoeffer about the word create. And again, same as before, if you have a word selected here, you can click on Amplify from your library. Here's all of the Bonhoeffer talking about earth. You can use the Amplify up here. So that is a good kind of first step to do when you're starting a project, or maybe you've been working on something, maybe you've been preaching weekly for a number of weeks and realize that you come back to the same 5 dictionaries every week. So you don't have to narrow it down. I mean, you could do a research search and search all of your dictionaries at once. Right-click, research all dictionaries. That's literally going through all of my dictionaries in the library. So you never really have to create your own group. You could just navigate this way. But if you know that there are 5 dictionaries that you always go to on a Tuesday morning when you do your first step in sermon preparation or Bible study preparing or whatever, you can create a user group, as I did with Bonhoeffer. You can create any number of user groups and then search those groups through research as you would with these predefined groups. So it's a nice way to kind of make Accordance work for you and do the kind of search you want to do with specific resources of your choice. Any questions about setting up a group in the library or amplifying or the research? We kind of covered a few different features at once there, but any questions about that?
Yes, Abram, when you do the when you get the results on Bonhoeffer like you did,
yeah,
and let's say it had 4 results or something, can you just be able to can you highlight it to copy and paste it into a Word document?
Yeah.
It'll do all those?
Yeah, it should. Let me just get a text edit open here real quick and see if that. Yep, yeah, it'll work that way just fine. Now there's a couple. I'm glad you asked, Chris, because let me just take another minute on the info pane. You could open this as I showed you, in a new zone, so you get the whole thing. You can also click on more, and it's going to give you the full paragraph. But again, this is all personal preference and kind of how do you work visually and how much information and how do you want to process it. But I have it set to show excerpts. You could change it to show full text so that now, well, I guess it was already doing it. Let me just run the search again. Research Bonhoeffer works. Now it is showing, nope. Now it's showing the full text. I had to reset that there. So now I'm getting a full paragraph, and you know that it's a new hit. Now it's not marked here. In other words, as I say, this is just the volumes that have a hit. The hits, you can tell it's a different hit if you scroll down and you see this blue font pop up with the open or the source here. That's how you know what's a new hit and not. But you might consider, if you just want, I like the excerpts because usually this research search is returning a lot of stuff, and I don't want the whole thing. I just want to see if it's interesting, and if it is, I'll click it open in a new zone. But you certainly could have this set to show full text to see it all at once. But to your question, Chris, yeah, everything copies and pastes right out of here. I mean, you could do your research just with this pane here and not open anything and probably get everything you need.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Good question. Any other questions about research or user groups or the library? All right, well, let's talk about just a couple other things that I think might be useful to know when you're getting going with Accordance. We've talked about setting up a workspace. We've talked about parallel panes. We've talked about commentaries in a pane versus in a zone so that you can get the table of contents. Talked about tying tabs. We've talked about preferences. Talked about the library and new user groups and amplifying and research toolbar. We've covered a lot of territory. Here are a few other things that I think are useful to know, and these are kind of in no particular order. Little scatter shot here, but I want to share these with you anyway. This is the context slider in Accordance, and again, that tooltip works here. If I haven't suppressed it in my preferences, and by default it's on, it says show additional context for each verse in your search result. So let's get a new tab open here, and let's just do a word search for love. 813 times in the NRSV, and you'll see that it returns the individual verse in which that word appears, with that word highlighted in red. And when I scroll through, I'm just looking at single verses. Now, if I wanted to get into a little bit more context, so for example, here's a good example, Exodus 20, but showing steadfast love to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. That's starting in the beginning, in the middle of a sentence, and I want a little bit more information on that. So we'll take this context slider and slide it forward. So I slid it to 1, and so it just adds a verse of context. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. Okay, well, I've got an antecedent for them. I still want more. I'm going to slide it to 2. All right, I got even more context. You shall not make for yourself an idol. So now I know the context of the word love. Maybe I want to stop now and read all of Exodus 20. Well, I'll just put the context slider to A for all. But then when I'm done with that, if I slide it back to 0, now I'm back to just my hit results, individual verses that have the word in the search returned for me. So that's a little thing, but it's worth saying because every time I do a word search, I want to know what the verse in question says, but more often than not, now I couldn't do this 813 times. I would love to have the kind of time to do that. But when I see a verse like this, because he loved your ancestors, he chose their descendants after them. He brought you out of Egypt with his own presence by his great power. And I really want to know what the rest of that verse says. So the context slider, if you don't know about it, or if you're getting results that you're not getting to see the context, or you're seeing too much or too little, chances are sliding this whichever way is gonna give you what you need. And let me just go back to the info pane, because I did say at the beginning, I mentioned that, and I'll do that very briefly, and then we'll leave the last couple minutes for questions. Add parallel info pane. It's going to curate your library for you. It's going to show you commentaries and study Bibles and all sorts of things. If you click Shift and hold it and take something like commentaries and drag it up, you can actually rearrange the order. This is new in Accordance 12. Maybe I never use the apparatus, so I'll put that at the bottom. Maybe I use the word list sometimes, but I always use the study Bibles first and then the commentaries. I'm just holding down Shift, selecting the category, and dragging it up and down. But I wanted to show you that too, because that's kind of a cool way to get this set up. And then once you've got these open, you can hover for instant details, or you can click them open in a parallel pane. You can just kind of navigate there to your heart's delight. I think a user group is a great thing to have set up, but with the info pane and the research search, you could maybe never set up a user group and be able to access everything quickly enough that you could just use these methods to get to your stuff. But the info pane has been around for a couple versions in Accordance, and it makes it easier now to just see what you have on a given verse or topic, and to kind of essentially put your library here right next to your text keyed to the verse in question. So context slider and info pane, two little, I guess, extras that I wanted to share. But I'm aware our time is drawing to a close. Let me just see if folks have any questions as we think about wrapping up in a few moments here.
Chris, did you have a question a minute ago?
Yes, on the context slider, do either you, Linda, or Abram, do y'all know if there is a keyboard shortcut for it? I use it all the time, and that keeps me from having to go to the mouse and come back to the keyboard.
Abram, while you're there, Darren had a question on where do you set that context slider?
Okay. Yeah, so to your question, Chris, I think that was you. I don't think so, unless Linda knows of a keyboard shortcut for the context slider, but I don't think there is. And I think the reason for that is in any program, I think this might be true on like computer-wide, for there to be a keyboard shortcut, it has to exist in a drop-down menu, and context slider is only right here. Linda, correct me if I'm wrong on that, but
I think that's correct, and I don't know, you can make a keyboard shortcut, but I am not quite sure how you would make that for your context slider. So
yeah, yeah, and even to create a keyboard shortcut, it has to exist somewhere up here, even if you're making your own.
Yeah.
So Linda, you had mentioned the preferences for the context. Is this what you were talking about here?
Yes.
Yeah, there's a number of settings here under preferences, search tabs. You can have it add automatic context or not. You can change these numbers so that it's set to a certain default. But for me, I like it with no context initially, because when I'm searching a word, I just want to see the word and all its uses all at once. I'll kind of I like to be able to decide on the fly when I want more context or not. But yeah, you could certainly adjust those to whatever you desired in the preferences. Yeah, Linda, did we catch everything in the chat box?
Yes.
Okay. Excellent.